Hi, everyone. My name is Duncan Autrey, and I am a conflict transformation educator and catalyst for cultural change. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about international relations theory and conflict transformation theory. And the reason I'm doing this is because this morning when I woke up, I was looking at my news, and the thing that I saw about in the news today was that Donald Trump has made the decision to have the United States withdraw from the Universal Postal Union. Universal Postal Union is something that was created in the Treaty of Berne 144 years ago. And it's the treaty that all over the world helps countries collaborate to have a postal system that works. And I'm not just talking about this because I'm worried that my forever global stamps, these are stamps that forever I can mail a letter to anywhere in the world for this one stamp. I think they cost like $1 or so. And that's amazing. And the fact that this isn't, maybe this is under a threat as the United States sort of withdraws from this global treaty that allows us to all have an international postal system, that's frustrating, but that's not necessarily my concern. I studied international relations through college and grad school because I kind of grew up wanting to work for world peace. And world peace seems like a really important cause, and I'm really excited to work on that. And as I went through school, I learned that this idea of ever arriving at peace maybe is not totally possible. Conflict is in a certain way inevitable. There's a way that we are always going to be in disagreement, and there's always going to be different perspectives. But what I have learned is that there are lots of ways that we can be in conflict better. There's ways that we can improve how those relationships work. And that is something that I have decided to sort of leverage my career around and to work on. And I want to walk you through sort of how international relations gets us to sort of peace and a better world that we all can be a part of. And I want to do that by actually taking us through a little bit of international relations theory, which is going to take us through some European history and kind of get us up to date with where we are in the world. I have about 6 pages of notes here, so get ready. This is going to be a minute, but I promise you this is going to be interesting. And the direction that we're going is to move towards what I call the Fractal Union theory. And this is something that will make sense soon, but let's go ahead and try to see if we can get there. The thing that I really want all of us to understand is that what's happening in the world around us, what's happening in international politics, is not only is that relevant to us because it impacts our lives and might impact my little stamps over there, but we are all participating in this. This is something that we are all co-creating. And I noticed that, especially at least in my country, like in the United States, people don't actually pay a lot of attention to international relations. People don't really pay attention to what's going on in the world. And that's something that I think is really important. So let's talk about the history of international relations. International relations, I'll just have to say here that this starts as a pretty Eurocentric approach, right? We have to start with international relations theories usually starts in Europe, and some of these things did spread throughout the world, and they are now the foundation for international law and the foundational for the global order that we live in. But I want to go ahead and take us all the way back to the creation of the nation state. The nation state happened with the Treaty of Westphalia. That was in 1648. The Treaty of Westphalia was a peace treaty that ended the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War was a war that basically was fought all over the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire was created all the way back in the 1500s. And it was based on the idea that each leader of each little area could decide what their religion and what their culture would be. And you had to be part of that religion if you wanted to live in that spot. And if you didn't want to live in that spot, you can move somewhere else. So I want to show you a map of what Europe looked like just before the beginning of the 30 Years' War. This is, that's the Holy Roman Empire. And you can see there, it's kind of mainly Germany and Eastern Europe and Central Europe that we're looking at here. And you can see how it's broken up into tons and tons of tiny little places. And then what happened in the 30 Years' War was basically a war initially between Protestants and Catholics. I think there was a question about whether or not during communion, whether or not the blood and the body of Christ like actually turned into the blood and body in Christ, or whether it was just a metaphor. People went to war over this. But eventually, all those people of all those little areas started going to war with each other. They hired militias and mercenaries, and basically everyone just went to war with each other. 8 million people died during this period. And not just from the war, because of plague and famine, and there wasn't enough food. I mean, the situation was really gnarly. And so at the end of the war, they came up with this treaty that said, hey, instead of us all dividing ourselves based on like what religion we are and what group we are or what leader we are, let's come up with states, like a whole state, and people will sort of join together. And so the countries that we know of today, that was born out of that. And just a reminder that this was just like 370 years ago. So the whole idea that we have countries and that the whole world is organized that way is actually kind of a new idea, a relatively new idea. Basically, like the idea is these countries were sovereign. There was kind of a rule that you couldn't really interfere with with what others are doing. We're not going to go to war with other people just because we don't agree with them. And that sort of created the foundation of that. There was also an idea of creating a balance of power. Making sure that these countries are kind of all more or less equally strong was the way that people were hoping to have there be peace in the world. And so quickly out of this, after the nation states were born, the two theories of international relations were born. They were called realism and liberalism. You're just gonna have to separate. Liberalism in this case is different than the liberal that we think of, though they're slightly connected. And basically, realism was the idea that, hey, all of these states are in an anarchy. Who knows what's gonna happen? They all might go to war in a minute. And so the job of each state was to protect themselves. Hobbes wrote a book called The Leviathan, just about 3 years after the end of the Treaty of Westphalia. And he basically said that it's human nature to be violent, it's human nature to be barbarians, and that the creation of the state was a way for us to sort of put some structure on that. But this idea that human nature was inherently ready to fight with each other basically just got transferred into the state system. So the idea was that states, as new actors and individuals, would be wanting to fight with each other all the time. And then I don't know, so a new world where all of these new countries would just start fighting doesn't really solve the problem that people are trying to do by creating the Peace of Westphalia. And so then come in like Voltaire and John Locke and Adam Smith, who basically invented capitalism. And they basically said, hey, by creating governments, by creating rules and laws, we're actually creating peace. And this started moving on. Immanuel Kant kind of came in next, and Immanuel Kant did a lot of thinking about how we could get to a state of perpetual peace. Because basically the war is pretty unpopular. Everyone was dying, no one liked that, no one wanted to be killed by their neighbors, no one wants to go kill for some other cause. And so this idea that like war was unpopular made it seem that if we have democracies, people in democracies are going to want to not go to war, because if you're being elected by your people, if you send them to war, that's a pretty unpopular choice. And so democracies will be a way of creating peace, a way of creating laws and things in the world. And so this sort of moved on, and basically moved on to international law, and the idea that international law would be a way of preventing these countries from going to each other. Basically, if we come up with enough rules and laws and structures, like the system around us, the international system, could become peaceful and really bring forward that form of human nature, the part of us that wants to get along and all be peaceful. And that sort of moved on, sort of modern sort of liberal thought thinking basically has noted that countries that are democracies almost never go to war with each other. A war only seems to happen within countries that are not democratic, or in places where, with other non-democracies. And you can think about that. You don't actually come into many examples of democracies ever fighting with each other. But I think that there might be an example recently. But anyways, nonetheless, we'll set that aside. And so this debate has been going on for almost 300 years. Is the world an anarchist, total anarchy, like total wild thing that is out of control? And if so, that realist perspective is really important. The realist perspective would basically say that we need to, look out for our self-interest. And then the liberal perspective is saying, hey, we can all get along if we just come up with enough rules and we can all find peace. Because that's what people really want. And this debate has been going on. And all the way till today, you can go to Foreign Policy magazine and read articles basically saying like liberalism is the right idea or realism is the right idea. I remember when I was in high school back in the 90s, I was taking an international relations class. It was probably like 1996, I guess. And in 1996, our teacher kind of made us choose, are you a realist or are you a liberal? And I remember actually saying that I want to be realist because I really personally want to be realistic and practical about things. And then my teacher was like, no, you clearly didn't do the homework. Realism is the part where you want to fight. And Duncan, I think you're more of a peacemaker. And he had me right at that point. So really easy for me to identify with liberalism. Let's make peace and let's all get along. Now, as this gets taught over the years, and still today, you can go to classes, international relations, and your teacher is going to show you something like this. and basically, the idea here is that there's like realism and there's liberalism, and you can sort of map them here. So you can say, what is the belief of realism? Realists believe that it's total anarchy. I'm just going to make a caveat here. I know that there's kind of anarchy, which is the anarchy of like, let's get rid of the state, or let's get rid of, basically the idea of anarchy as being like not having a state or not having countries. And obviously a bunch of countries and anarchy is kind of a strange thing. But the original concept of the word anarchy is something that is leaderlessness or non-hierarchical. And definitely the world up until recently doesn't have anyone in charge. And so all the countries basically get to do what they want. That's what anarchy means here. But the belief of liberalism is that we're all interdependent. We all depend on each other. We all need each other. The strategy in the face of this for realists is let's use power, be the most powerful country, and let's be ready for conflict, which could happen at any moment. Liberalism says let's cooperate. Let's find international laws. The strategy is to come up with rules and things. In realism, the actor is the state. In liberalism, the actor is also the state, but also there's international organizations that are there. For realism, the tools that we use to protect ourselves or to have a strong military and also just to become economically powerful, who has the most resources, making sure that you have enough oil and wood and all those things. In liberalism, the strategy is to create treaties and laws and international agreements that can sort of have us all work together. And then in this thing, the question comes up of how to act. And the idea is for realists is to act for your self-interest. The only thing that makes sense is make sure to work out whatever's best for you and for your country and for your people. And liberalism says, wait, the best strategy to create a good world is for us to cooperate with each other and to recognize our mutual interests. And so this is the model, and this is this thing that people have been trying to choose between over and over again. Now, in 1992, there was a German political thinker named Alexander Wendt, and he was a professor at Yale at the time, and he took an idea that was in social and from sociology called Constructivism. And I'm just going to give a little history on that. Constructivism comes from a guy named Lev Vygotsky. He was a Russian thinker. And basically, Constructivism says that people are actively creating the world through their own subjective understanding of what's happening. And that is how reality is created. That reality is created by people enacting their sort of subjective perspectives. I know those are some big words, but basically he's saying that, you know, the world is what you make of it. Or this article that Alexander Went wrote in 1992 was basically was called "Anarchy is What You Make of It." And he basically said to the system that whether or not we live in an anarchist system or a system of interdependence is whether or not we treat the system as one that is an anarchy or one where we're interdependent. If we believe that we are in danger of being attacked all the time and we build up our military, then we are in a world where we potentially might get attacked at any time, and so therefore we need to build up our military. But if we believe in a world where we can cooperate and we can find our mutual interests and we're willing to sort of make the adjustments that it takes to sort of be in relationship with one another, then that's the world we're creating. And in fact, he got to 1995, he said this really famous thing that I just really always remember. And he pointed out that having there be 500 nuclear weapons in the United Kingdom is less threatening than only 5 nuclear weapons in North Korea. And so from a realist perspective, that kind of doesn't make sense. Those, you know, theoretically in an anarchist world, like any minute now, Great Britain could turn on the United States and just launch their nuclear missiles at us, and we would be in a lot of trouble. But actually, we know that there's friendship, and we know that we get along with the United Kingdom. There's that long history and sort of that special relationship. And so by developing that special relationship, those weapons are actually not as threatening. And so now we're sort of thinking, hey, it's actually more like cooperation. So in one sense, in the face of, in the relation to North Korea, the United States takes a realist approach. But in relationships to the United Kingdom, there's more of a liberal sort of cooperative approach. Now, of course, there's all sorts of complexity now as our relationships are changing here. And I just point out that there's been a lot of ways that lately the United States has been undermining its friendships with European countries and countries that's traditionally had a good relationship with, and has been getting closer to North Korea and trying to make that a more friendly relationship. That's it's a very complex feature there. But basically, like, the point that Alexander Went pointed out is that we are creating the world we want to live in, like, through the relationships that we're in. It's actually the quality of the relationships. It's the way that we are talking about it. It's the way that our culture is understanding what is even happening that is creating the reality that we live in. And so now, when I was just in grad school recently, they have a new column to this chart, right? So now they're just like adding here constructivism, and all right, so constructivism, it's a little small over here. Okay, so and basically the constructivist philosophy says like that the belief here is that the world is based off of our norms and our values. Basically, our identity is like what makes us be who we are, right? Almost like our belief is based on our beliefs, right? The strategy in this world is to like develop relationships and the actors are actually individuals. It's the media. It's like the character of the people who are in charge. So this is like leaders. So basically people, right? And then the tools that we want to use in this then are our identity and what are our mutual interests and like finding ways of doing that. And the way to act is to like be conscious of like what are the relationships, like actually being conscious of how we create the world we want to create, right? So it's just like basically create our own reality, right? I'm not really expecting you to read all this. I'm just kind of showing you what's happening in here, because this is how this got presented to me. And I remember being in grad school and I'm looking at this and I'm like, these are not three of the same things. And I noticed this because I am a big fan of conflict transformation theory. And conflict transformation theory, it kind of has like a whole, basically like another approach here. And conflict transformation theory has also something similar to this. And this new thing is basically saying that there are 3 strategies for resolving conflict. We can use power, we can use rights, and we can use interests. Now, the idea here is that power as a way of resolving conflict means that whoever's stronger wins the conflict. That follows this realist perspective. The rights-based approach to resolving conflict is saying that we can come up with a set of laws that are the same for everyone. And so this rights-based approach sort of tracks across this liberal approach, right? They're like, let's just come up with the laws, the international laws and theories that will make us be able to sort of hold this relationship together, right? And then the interest-based approach, which is basically the heart of like modern conflict resolution, at least for the last like 35 years or so. An interest-based approach says that we can best resolve conflict by figuring out that what do you actually need? What do both of the people in the relationship actually need? And then to transfer that into how do we want to be in relationship with each other? How, in our specific context, in our specific relationship, do we want to connect with each other? And resolving conflicts based on that means that we do have to sort of dial into like the individual experience, so like that very like idiosyncratic like experience. But we're able to deal with that sort of nuanced question without resorting to like universal laws or just resorting to who's stronger or who has the most influence. And so when I was able to see how this fits, this conflict transformation concepts or these conflict resolution concepts, by the way, these are developed by Fisher and Urey. Fisher, Urey, and also Bill Patton were some folks that wrote a book called Getting to Yes, and they were part of the Harvard School, negotiation school, and they came up with this, and this is now sort of like this fundamental theory now for conflict resolution. If you like follow anything of mine out there in the world, you'll find me talking about this a lot. So I'm looking at these columns and I'm like, these don't totally track something. And fortunately, with around conflict resolution theory, I already created like a new model for thinking about this. And this is now where we start getting into the Fractal Union. Basically, like what I started noticing is that all conflict is basically a conflict between self and other, right? And like, do I want to have the needs met? Or do I want to get your needs met? Or do I want to pay attention to the actual relationship that's happening here? That's what it says here, the relationship. And so then I was able to look at this and go, oh, okay, now we're like having now I can sort of map this international relations theory onto here, right? So international relations theory has been a realism over here, has liberalism over here, and here is constructivism. Or as we were talking about before, there's like power, rights, and interests. Another way I like thinking about this sometimes, which I think is like also helpful, is like in this sort of like crazy anarchy, there's a way that this is freedom. Here we have like the freedom to basically act however we want, do whatever we want. But if we want to be in relationships with others, we actually have to put limits on our behavior. So these become these like tensions that are happening. And what we sort of learn from this, this really idea got captured really well by a gentleman named Paul Tillich. Tillich was a theologian from early part of the 20th century, and Paul Tillich wrote about power and love, is what he called these. And he basically said the power is the desire of all living things to extend themselves and express themselves with ever greater intensity and extensity, to basically get out there as much as possible. And love is the desire for us to connect across our reconnect the ways that we have been separated. And so what Paul Tillich, though, points out is that either one of these chosen all by itself becomes degenerative. If we only focus on the chaos and the reality and our self-interests and protecting our own power and our own freedom to do whatever we want, then that will take us towards a path of destruction and obliteration and fighting. If, on the other hand, we only focus on finding the rules and the laws and the rights and let's come up with a structure to sort of have us all get along. You can sort of think about this as like communion. There's a way that this becomes so much focused on other and community and so forth that we kind of go into this weakness of like a kumbaya, like I don't really care what I need, I'm just going to do what everyone else needs. And so the extreme of this and the extreme of this become fundamentally really dangerous. And so what happens then is we have to start figuring out how to be in the dance between the two. We actually have to find this ongoing balance. And this is where these ideas of constructivism, focusing on the relationships and focusing on our collective interests, our mutual interests, becomes like a whole new thing, right? Because it's like, it stops becoming a question of like who's right and who's wrong, or which is the right theory, or what's the better description of reality. And instead starts becoming a description of how do we want to do this? How do we want to be in this tension that we know is always going to be happening? And so, like, to start sort of wrapping up here, like, yeah, we do live in a world that is scary and that we can't necessarily trust that everyone is looking out for our best interests. And so we have to take care of ourselves. It's also really important for us to speak up and emphasize the great ideas that we want to share in the world. That's fundamentally important. But also, we live in a world where people want to have peace. We actually do want to live in a way where we all get along. No one wants to be caught up in a world of ongoing war. Conflict is not a comfortable experience. And so we have to find ways to basically limit our behavior so that we can be in relationship with each other, so we can find ways of getting along, so we can organize a freaking global postal system with all the different countries and all the different interests, and actually sort of get along, so we can actually get along and not get our needs met, or get our needs met. And so both of these true. And what we're being invited into is focusing then on what is the quality of the relationships we want to have. How do we actually want to be in relationship with each other in the world and in our lives, right? And so the problem of resolving or of this withdrawal from the Universal Postal Union that's starting today is that it's not so much that it's not so much a question of whether or not it's fair. By the way, the reason why Trump is withdrawing is Trump and the U.S. government or presidential administration, whatever you want to call it, the reason why they're withdrawing is because they're saying that China basically gets to ship things at a cheaper postal rates than the United States is. And so it's much less expensive to ship things from undeveloped countries or underdeveloped countries like China to the United States, and it costs more for the United States to ship things to other places. And basically, from this self-interest based approach, Trump is concerned that we're not, getting our needs met, and he's withdrawing from the thing so that he can maybe have it be a negotiate, so then we can then still get our needs met or help U.S. manufacturers export things. Honestly, I don't really know the economic impact of this, but just explaining what that looks like. And so But, you know, the United States has been withdrawing from a couple other things. Maybe you weren't paying attention, but we recently withdrew from the United Nations Human Rights Council because the United States didn't think that it was fair. It wasn't treating Israel fairly enough. And so the United States withdrew from that. Also, the United States withdrew from NAFTA recently and decided to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement because it didn't feel like it was treating the United States manufacturing fairly. All these different trade wars that are happening right now, which are also in certain ways of basically fighting against the World Trade Organization and basically like hard-earned, you know, global treaties around how we do trade, like withdrawing from those because it didn't seem like it was fair. And so it's interesting. It's like whether or not it's fair is like not quite the right question, because what's fair or not is a subjective question. And it's an evolving question. And that's why we have the ability to negotiate and to work these kinds of things out. But these are subjective things. And then there's also like, it's not so much also about whether or not like we have these like restraints on our power. There's a way in which creating structure in the international global order actually gives us the power to accomplish things, right? It's not so much that we have to follow the rules of the postal system or follow the rules of human rights law. By having that, it gives us like the structure to sort of grow and be able to sort of accomplish the things we want, because now we're in a relationship and we have clear boundaries and we have clear ways of interacting with each other. And so by totally withdrawing, like it feels like it can be like a really dangerous thing. But the thing that really concerns me is that it seems as though we are starting to ignore like the importance of these relationships that we have. You know, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is something that holds together most European countries and the United States and Canada and maybe some other places, but Iceland also, and all of these countries have decided to sort of work together. But Trump has been thinking that's not really fair because we don't really get to, other people aren't paying as much. They're contributing more with actual soldiers and actual people in the battle, but it doesn't seem like it's fair because the United States is spending a lot of money on that. And maybe that's fair, maybe it's not. But what is important is the relationships that we're building here and the relationships that have been developed over a long time. And it's worth remembering that the European Union and NATO and all of these things just came out of like a crazy world war that happened only like 60, 70 years ago now. And that war, we lost millions of people's lives in that. And it's really intense to the relationships that we have today are hard earned, and the absence of those relationships has us fighting in ways that are really dangerous. And so it's just really important, because remember that question about why are those 500 nuclear weapons in the UK not as frightening as the 5 in North Korea? Like, that is actually like a really important question. And the reason is because we have good relationships. And so really focusing on the quality of our relationships becomes like a really important thing for us to focus on. And this doesn't just apply to international relations, right? We can see this being really important in international politics. In the United States, but really in lots of countries around the world, we have this powerful division about how things are going. And so there, people get stuck in also what's a bit of an illusion. It seems like there's a choice between, do we go backwards in history and try to really fortify the values and the principles that got us into the place where we are? Do we try to, quote unquote, make America great again and go back to sort of an old way of being? Or on the other hand, do we leave our traditions behind? Do we uproot sort of our history and move forward into a utopia where all the genders and all the races and all the religions are included, and we create space for everyone? Maybe there's no police, maybe we don't need borders anymore. Let's just go forward in that. But the point is actually we can't, this isn't actually a real choice. That tension is always going to be there. And we're not actually going to be able to choose between one or the other. Another thing is what about, how do we look in our workplaces. We can see that there's that need to have like innovation and creativity and individual agency. But there's also like, let's follow the rules and let's follow the structures. And so you can see that happening in the world of business, where there's like different values. It's sort of like, let's go forward or let's go back. And that tension, again, is always going to be there. In our interpersonal relationships, we struggle with these questions all the time. How do we have our freedom to act the way we want, to express ourselves the way we want? And then in what ways do we choose to sort of limit our behaviors, care about the needs of others, and sort of dial back our own self-expression so that we can be in relationship? I mean, this whole conversation about consent really plays into that question, right? Like, how do we take care of our own needs and also sort of to work out for the needs of the other? And the answer, again, comes back to relationships and interests. And like, what is this mutual relationship? How do we actually want to be in connection with each other? So yeah, it's really important for us to express ourselves. It's really important for us to advocate for our needs, for our perspectives, our individual ways of doing it, our team's way of doing it, our values. Let's get them out there. That's super important. But we can't do that at the expense of the relationships. We might have to negotiate so we can still be in relationship with other people. But we need to also remember that we'll always have to be in relationship with one another. And so we then come back to like, how do we want, like, what is the quality of being that we want to be in? How can we make these like ongoing relationships durable and connected? How can we like have strong but yet compassionate boundaries? How can we have the boundaries that makes it clear where we're willing to go and what's okay and what's not okay? And how can we use that to build stronger relationships? How can we have both of these things at the same time? How do we speak up for ourselves and maintain relationships? Now, it's totally possible for us to build a world for all of us. The world of conflict resolution has proven powerfully in the last many years that we have the tools for developing good relationships. We have the tools for having complex conversations about complex topics that can include all sorts of people. Me and all sorts of other mediators and facilitators and conflict transformation consultants, they're out there, and we are ready to help people have these really great conversations. But actually having a world that fits for all of us is a precarious situation. We only have to go back a couple decades for us to find times when humans have gotten out of balance, where their choices to defend their group or another has resulted in the loss of millions of lives. You know, we have World War II, we have, like Stalin and the Soviet Union, the Cultural Revolution, we have Rwanda. We have all sorts of times where we can just see how quickly we can slip into extreme violence and extreme horrible situations just by letting ourselves think that our side's right and the other side's wrong. I want to just point out that this is something that I would say is like a threat both from the left and the right, to think that we have, that either side has like the right answer and that there's not space for other perspectives. So let us not lose sight of our common cause here. We all want peace in this world. We all also need to continue working and fighting for that. That's a struggle that we're going to have to come back to again and again. The relative peace that we have in the world right now, that is hard earned, and we're going to have to continue to keep fighting for that. The fights that we're going to have and this is not something that someone else is going to do for us. There aren't laws or rules that are going to help us create peace. It is really in the way that we choose to relate to each other. It is really the way that we choose to be in relationship with each other. This is something that's part of all of our interactions. This is something that I'm willing to keep working for. This is something I'm going to keep speaking up about. If you are interested in the things I spoke about today, you're welcome to come visit DuncanAutrey.com. I also have a podcast. It's called Fractal Friends. And the website for that is fractalfriends.us. And there's also a newsletter you can sign up. And also, if you're interested in talking about how to transform some of the conflicts that you are seeing in your life, in your workplace, in your companies, in your teams, in your family, I would happily talk to you about that. I would love to be of support. And on my website, you can also sign up for a consultation. We can just do a half-hour phone call if that would ever feel useful. But just remember that we are all in this together, and we do all want to live in a peaceful world. And it is up to us in each of our interactions to make this happen. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening.